around him. And it's not that he was throwing fits and kicking over C-stands and, throwing boxes around or anything.
Ron Howard, America's favorite director. At 89, I dreamed of being a director, and now I'm living that dream. The red-headed kid from Mayberry grew up to become one of Hollywood's most respected filmmakers. For over 5 decades, he's been the industry's steady hand, the guy everyone calls reliable, kind, professional. But behind that warm smile and soft-spoken demeanor lies a truth rarely told. Even the nicest guy in Hollywood has limits. He doesn't yell. He doesn't storm off set. He doesn't throw tantrums. His style is calm, methodical, and based entirely on mutual respect. But not everyone thrives in that environment, and not everyone was easy for him to work with. Some actors didn't just test his patience. They rewrote the rules of who he'd ever work with again. These weren't just creative differences. They were the kinds of personality clashes that leave lasting scars. Moments that, even now, make him pause before answering questions in interviews. Because Ron Howard is proof that even nice guys have a breaking point. It all started in 1982 with Shelley Long. Ron was young, directing Night Shift, his big studio debut. He needed everything to run smoothly. Long came in with TV buzz and early success, but immediately clashed with his easygoing style. Where Ron encouraged discovery and fluidity, she demanded control. Every take, every line, every movement became a battle over tone and precision. The crew saw it too. She was overly calculated, resisting improvisation and turning even simple scenes into tense negotiations. Ron never lost his temper, but he did start planning around her instead of with her. That experience taught him something critical. Preparation and professionalism are only useful if they don't suffocate the creative process. Then came Tom Sizemore on Ransom. Intensity? He had it. But control? Not so much. Ron builds his sets like families, grounded in trust and rhythm. Sizemore brought chaos. He arrived late, disoriented, often needed multiple takes, not because he didn't know his lines, but because his energy was erratic. The kind of actor you couldn't plan around, just hope to contain. In one key scene, his behavior forced Howard to stop production entirely. It wasn't rage. It was quiet determination to protect the integrity of the set. And when Sizemore passed away, Howard said nothing. Because sometimes silence says everything. But the most complicated fracture came from someone who was supposed to be like family, Andy Griffith. Young Ron grew up in Mayberry, learning how to act by watching Griffith lead. At first it felt warm, safe, but as the show went on, Griffith's demeanor changed. He became more controlling, more withdrawn, even sharp with the people around him. Ron, growing into adolescence, started asking questions about his character, the story, the future, and Griffith didn't like that. He didn't like being challenged, even by the boy America thought of as his son. After the show ended, their relationship quietly dissolved. No joint appearances, no public camaraderie. Just a carefully worded tribute when Griffith passed, and decades of silence that said far more than words ever could. Then there's Russell Crowe, in A Beautiful Mind. The combination of Crowe's raw talent and Howard's steady direction seemed like award-winning gold, and it was. But the process was a storm. Crowe challenged everything: camera placement, blocking, script changes. Every note became a debate. One crew member said it best: Ron had to hold on tight and hope for the best. And even though the film swept the Oscars, they never worked together again. Not because of ego, but because Howard couldn't afford that kind of daily friction again. In interviews, Crowe later said, "Real art isn't comfortable. Howard clearly disagreed. Then came the one relationship that stung the most: Henry Winkler. Happy Days was supposed to be Ron's show. Richie Cunningham was the lead, the heart, the boy next door. But audiences fell in love with the Fonz, and Winkler became the star. Scripts changed. Marketing changed. The show evolved around a character that was never meant to be the center. Ron felt himself pushed to the sidelines. He didn't resent Henry personally, but professionally, he resented the shift. He said later, "There were times I questioned my place on the show." That experience taught him an early, important lesson. Hollywood plays favorites, and the spotlight can move without warning. Then there was Mel Gibson. By the time Ransom rolled around, Gibson was riding the high of Braveheart, a box office king with Oscar cred. And with that came power, a lot of it. On set, he didn't just act, he pushed for rewrites, questioned direction, even weighed in on things like catering. Every major decision turned into a creative negotiation. Howard, always calm, always in control, found himself constantly adjusting just to keep the shoot on track. One crew member joked that Mel wasn't co-starring, he was co-directing. Howard didn't explode, but when asked about it later, he said, "Some actors bring passion that spills over into everything. That can be energizing or exhausting." But the real test of patience came with Marlon Brando. In 1995, Howard was offered a dream project, directing a legend in a prestige drama. On paper, it was Oscar bait. In reality, it was a nightmare. Brando refused to memorize lines, demanded cue cards hidden around the set, would vanish for hours mid-shoot, and when he did show up, he'd rewrite entire scenes on the fly. Not because he had a vision, but because he could. The set became his playground, and Ron was left trying to manage the unmanageable. Eventually, the whole project fell apart. Howard never went into detail, but he didn't need to. Everyone in the industry already knew. In one interview, Howard later said, "Some legends earn their reputation through their work. Others earn it through their behavior." That says it all. These aren't just stories of difficult actors. They're the moments that defined Ron Howard's evolution, not just as a director, but as a leader, a collaborator, and ultimately a storyteller who learned that talent alone isn't enough to build great cinema. It's easy to assume that the worst thing a director can deal with is a bad script or a tight budget. But those things are fixable. What's much harder to repair is the human dynamic on set. The trust, the energy, the silent understanding between director and actor that lets creativity breathe. When that breaks, everything else begins to crack around it. And for someone like Ron Howard, who built his reputation on steady, respectful collaboration, those cracks weren't just frustrating, they were dangerous. Hollywood loves to romanticize chaos: the tortured genius, the rebellious artist, the difficult actor who pushes boundaries in the name of truth. We see it in interviews, in award shows, in the myth-making machine that turns volatility into legend. But the reality is far messier and less glamorous. When a director shows up on set and finds their entire shooting schedule derailed because a star is 2 hours late, or refuses to say lines, or starts rewriting scenes with no notice, it doesn't feel like art. It feels like sabotage. That's what Howard understood early. He knew that filmmaking is already fragile. It's a million things that can go wrong, and only one or two that can go right. So, introducing ego into that delicate ecosystem wasn't just inconvenient, it was potentially catastrophic. That's why these experiences weren't just bad days on set. They were turning points. the kinds of lessons you carry with you into every future project. After Shelley Long, Howard became hyper-aware of the actors he cast in lead roles. He didn't want control freaks. He wanted collaborators, people who came prepared, yes, but who also came open to discovery. After Tom Sizemore, he stopped assuming that talent was enough. Because sometimes, a brilliant performance isn't worth the emotional cost to the crew and the rest of the cast. After Brando, he realized something even deeper. There's a difference between respecting someone's legacy and allowing it to overshadow your own. And after Russell Crowe, that was the one that may have hit the hardest. Because Crowe wasn't disrespectful, he wasn't toxic, he was just intense. So intense that every day felt like a debate club wrapped inside a therapy session inside a war room. And that's even trickier. Because when an actor is difficult for the sake of being difficult, it's easier to draw the line. But when an actor is difficult because they care too much, that's where things get murky. That's where Howard had to ask himself, at what point does passion start to become obstruction? Crowe challenged everything because he believed it made the work better. But what he didn't see was that it also drained the energy of the set, wore people down, made every hour feel heavier than it had to be. Ron knew the difference between pressure that lifts people up and pressure that slowly erodes the spirit of a production. And he never forgot it. These stories also reveal another important truth. Being nice in Hollywood doesn't mean being passive. It doesn't mean being a pushover. It doesn't mean letting stars walk all over you just because they've got box office draw or Oscar buzz. True kindness in this business is about consistency, about professionalism, about showing up every day, ready to do the work, with a deep respect for the time, effort, and energy of everyone involved. From the lead actor to the lighting tech to the PA fetching coffee at 5 a.m. And that's where Ron Howard drew his line in the sand. Not with shouting, not with ultimatums, but with decisions. Quiet ones. Strategic ones. You didn't hear about him firing actors mid-shoot, but you definitely noticed when they didn't show up in his next movie, or the one after that. He wasn't one to make enemies, but he knew exactly how to stop repeating bad experiences. It's worth noting, too, how many of these conflicts happened during major moments in his career. Night Shift was his first studio film. Happy Days was the foundation of his transition from child actor to adult artist. Ransom and A Beautiful Mind were high-stakes prestige projects with huge expectations. So when these clashes happened, it wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. A wrong step could have jeopardized everything he'd built. And yet, he kept his composure. He finished the films, and in most cases they still succeeded, sometimes massively. That's what makes Howard unique. He doesn't burn bridges. He just quietly reroutes around them. And what's even more remarkable, you don't hear him talking about this stuff. Not with bitterness, not with ego, not with gossip. Most of the stories we know about these difficult collaborations come from other crew members, behind-the-scenes documentaries, or decades-later interviews where Howard chooses his words with surgical precision. He never says they were a nightmare. He says, it was a learning experience. He doesn't call people out. He reflects, he processes, and then he moves on. That's a level of emotional intelligence you don't see every day in this industry, especially from people who've been in the business since childhood, especially from directors who've worked with massive egos and survived the golden age of studio politics. Ron Howard made it through 5 decades of Hollywood, and not just in front of the camera. He succeeded as a director, producer, and creative force, without becoming jaded, bitter, or power-hungry. that might be his greatest accomplishment. Because let's face it, Hollywood isn't kind to the kind. The industry often rewards the loudest, the most controversial, the ones who create chaos in the name of brilliance. But Howard never played that game. He didn't chase drama, he chased excellence. And if that meant walking away from big names, big money, or big opportunities to protect the spirit of his set, then so be it. In the end, his greatest legacy might not be the films he made, but the way he made them, with dignity, with humility. With a deep understanding that leadership isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about creating space for others to shine without sacrificing your own standards. So yes, these actors challenged him. Some frustrated him. A few may have even burned him. But every one of those moments sharpened his instincts, taught him what to look for, what to avoid, who to trust, and most importantly, what kind of environment he wanted to create. Because when Ron Howard steps onto a set, it's not just about rolling cameras. It's about building a culture, a feeling, a place where people actually want to do their best work. And that kind of atmosphere doesn't just happen by accident. It's a choice. One made day after day, project after project, conversation after conversation. So what surprised you the most about these stories? Did you expect the man behind Apollo 13, Cinderella Man, and A Beautiful Mind to face this much behind-the-scenes friction? Or do you think that's just the cost of greatness in Hollywood? Was he too strict, or were these actors simply crossing the line? Maybe the real takeaway is this. Even in an industry powered by ego, fame, and million-dollar personalities, success still comes down to something simple. Trust. Trust between director and actor, between cast and crew, between vision and execution. When that trust is broken, no amount of talent can fix it. Ron Howard didn't just survive Hollywood. He thrived in it, not by dominating every room or making headlines, but by building reputations, quietly, consistently, respectfully. These stories, as dramatic as they are, aren't about grudges. They're about boundaries. They're about knowing the difference between an artistic challenge and emotional chaos. And maybe most importantly, they're about learning when to push forward and when to protect your team by walking away. Howard's legacy isn't just built on Oscar wins or box office numbers. It's built on the environments he created, sets where people felt safe to explore, to collaborate, to fail and try again without fear. That's rare. And in many ways, that's what makes these moments of tension so revealing. They show just how far he was willing to go to preserve the kind of creative space he believed in. So what do you think? Would you have made the same choices? Could you keep your cool under pressure like Ron did? Or would you have cracked under the weight of personalities like Brando or Crow? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more revealing stories about the untold truths of the entertainment industry, the power of patience, and the quiet strength it takes to lead when no one else is keeping the peace.